Hi, I'm Jasmine Sihra, an intern at the FOFA Gallery, working as one of the coordinators of the FOFA Gallery's undergraduate student exhibition, USE. In this interview series, I'll introduce you to 5 of our incredible artists, former and current students at Concordia, who are among 14 artists with works chosen to be part of USE2021-2022, called The Sum of Our Shared Selves. In each interview, I'll talk to each artist more about the creative process behind their work, as well as what led them to pursue an artistic practice. In this episode, I listened to Kassandra Walters' ideas behind her work, For My Family, an installation made of sugar, tea, curry powder, pine, ash, gauze, flannel, and polyester. Important aspects that showcase her relationship to her family and lineage.
I'm Kassandra Walters. I'm a multimedia artist in my hopefully last year at Concordia. Feels like my degree has been forever. I work mostly with ceramics and fibers and kind of like a multitude of other materials, just like kind of everything in between, whatever works conceptually. I like to think about it like that. Materials are just super important in my practice. I guess it's another way of saying that.
How did you decide to embark on the program? You've said how long have you been in the program?
Oh boy. It's okay. I'm like a dinosaur at Concordia. It's been like 7 years. This is like my 7th year. I did a lot of part-time years. And then when the pandemic hit, I was kind of like, I was planning on, I wanted to be in ceramics. I had left the ceramics program and I wanted to be back in the ceramics program to make a piece that I had been thinking about for a while. And so I had planned to do that in 2020. And then the pandemic happened and I was like, oh, I don't know that I want to be in school in 2020. Like what is an online ceramics course? That doesn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. So I decided to not do ceramics that year. And then this year I'm back in ceramics making the work that I wanted to make. So I've been done my bachelor's for quite some time, but I'm just kind of like sticking around trying to do the things I want to do before I say goodbye to the facilities.
Yeah, and it sounds like you really want to use the program to improve or maybe get more deeper into a ceramic practice and add that to your portfolio maybe.
Yeah, it took me a while to understand that the point of art school is to develop your portfolio. I was caught up in the idea of university, getting all these fun, shiny tools and new techniques and things to do. But it took me a long time to be like, oh no, this is where you build your portfolio that you can take with you throughout the rest of your career. And so I'm kind of at that place right now where I'm like, oh, this is what I want for my grad school portfolio, these last arts works that I'm making. And these are the things that I need to fully realize before I get out of here.
So initially, what was it about the program that made it interesting and something you wanted to do? 7 years ago.
Yeah. I had applied to OCAD, actually. I'm from Toronto. So I had applied to OCAD and I had gotten into OCAD. And then when I got into OCAD, I had commitment issues. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know that I want to be there at all. And so I had looked up Concordia, and the program at OCAD was very specific. They were like, you don't get to choose a single course that you're taking in your first year. And I'm in the studio arts program at Concordia, and the studio arts program here is super open. It's kind of build your own degree. So you can just pick and choose from all of the different fine arts departments that the university has to offer. Mm-hmm. And that was what really interested me. I was nervous about being lumped into one sort of place, even though my background at the time had been painting and drawing. Mm-hmm. That was all I had done. but yeah, I didn't like the structure of that. I wanted something loose and with more freedom.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's very reminiscent of the others and the interviews I've done where everyone is sort of saying the studio arts like program at Concordia really allowed them to just flourish in ways that they wanted to.
Yeah, there's a ton of freedom. It's lovely. It's really, really nice. And it's like, um, Concordia has so much to offer in terms of the arts. Like it's such a diverse, the fine arts department is huge. It's such a diverse selection. And so like I've done, like programming for the arts, like programming for artists, and it was rough and it hurt my brain, but it was like never a thing that I would have ever explored if I didn't know that it was here for me, like if I didn't have access to that course. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been nice to kind of like dip my toes into a bunch of things that otherwise I would have never, ever thought about trying.
And was it in the program where you came up with this work that it's in use?
Yeah. So this was the artwork that is in use was an independent study in 2020. If you want me to talk a little bit about the inspiration for the work, or
yeah, so the work is called For My Family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah. So it like initially, I think like a lot of people of color, 2020 was a bit of a difficult year in a way that like George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matters movement was like I guess, what is the word for it? Was like a jumping off point, or like I don't know. It was a thing I couldn't ignore. Like I could no longer ignore the fact that my skin color was different than a lot of the people that I was around. Like I could no longer ignore these like things that never really bothered me about myself and my culture that I kind of like pushed to the side to be Canadian. They were like in my face all the time because everybody was talking about race, and I was trying to understand like my place in that. And so the work For My Family was kind of born out of this like need to like bridge that gap that I was feeling between like myself and my culture. And so I am a second generation Canadian. My parents are immigrants and I was born here. And so we have a very different way of life. Like I have a very different way of life than my parents. And when my parents were my age, they lived very differently and they were raised in an entirely different country with a way different standard of living. Mm-hmm. And so we butt heads on a lot of things because of that. And so the piece was just kind of like an expression of trying to understand them, and hoping that through this they could understand me better. Mm-hmm. And also to like start to do that work that is the healing of like intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And like, I guess my question is maybe going back to the events that had instigated sort of this work. Was it something that you had like at least thought of in those many years of your degree? Like you're like, should I maybe explore this? Or was it sort of like it really was the Black Lives Matter protests and also George Floyd's death that like pushed you? Where like I guess my question is more like you were in the program for so long and you were like in all these courses. Was there ever a time when you felt like maybe inspired or encouraged to like pursue these ideas and like really think about it in your work?
Yeah, I have like, I don't know, in some ways I've kind of dealt with this feeling of like shame for it taking so long for me to do this exploration of race and of like colonialism and culture, because it did take me a really long time. Like it truly was that event. Like it was George Floyd's death and like the uproar and, you know, the protests that were happening and being like so tuned in to the media in that time when I didn't have anything else to do. And like, I don't know, you know, I don't know if the pandemic didn't happen. I can't say that I, you know, would have gotten to this place. I can't say that I wouldn't have, but it was really like a big catalyst for me. And I mean, I lived a very, like, I tried to assimilate as best as I could to the people around me. Like I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood and I went to a very white high school. And I just like really didn't think about race. Like I really didn't think about race at all. And it sounds silly to say because like I am a brown person. I am a brown person. You look at me and you see a brown person. But that was never my first thought because all of the people around me, for the most part, they were white, you know, and I fit in with them. And I made myself like work with the way that they lived and like the culture that they showed me, you know, I made that my own. So yeah, it was really the Black Lives Matter protests and George Floyd that was really truly the jumping off point for me. Prior to this, my work was, you know, still kind of about the same issues, like about mental health and trauma and all of those things, but like from a place of trying to express and understand myself better rather than like my culture and my family and like the history of how I got to be here and, you know, how my family got to be here.
That's really beautiful. Like, no, like really beautiful that you're saying that. I know. I just want to like. I don't want you to feel like you're sharing trauma or anything right now. I don't feel like that's it at all, either on my end. To navigate something that's so like that's filled with like conflict and tension. Like there's all these conflicting feelings, and it's really difficult to do. And I just want to say like I think the way you did it was really, really fascinating. Like the materials you chose and how you installed the work and the poem. Like I thought there's something so tangible and direct about it that is fascinating for me. And I think a lot of people like me who are also brown and have come from whose families have come from these places that are dealing with lingering effects of colonialism and settler colonialism, and then you come to Canada. It's really confusing and it's really stressful, and it can be really there's no like right answer in terms of how you like deal with those things. There's no like a right way to do it. You just like do it at some point, and I think it's really meaningful that happened in 2020, sorry, for you with those protests. And I guess what my next question is, I'm sort of getting into it, is I sort of said it, I was really intrigued by your use of materials for this work. Like, why did you use those materials? Why was it important to express all of these ideas and feelings that you were feeling at the time?
When I had to kind of explore my identity, this was the first time that I really was ever doing this kind of exploration work. And as I delved deeper into like my understanding of the Caribbean and my understanding of my own cultural heritage, it got like murkier, like it got foggier and more confusing. And I was looking for like, I guess like a beginning of my lineage, like an end of my lineage, you know, and I just can't find it. And I don't have that information. And I will probably never have that information because it just has been erased, you know, it just doesn't exist. Yeah. But through doing that research, I started to realize that, you know, through colonialism and through like the transatlantic slave trade and the way that the Caribbean has been affected, there have been so many like touch points for so many different cultures that I don't really get to claim any one single culture. And at first that was very upsetting because like, I was like looking for the, this like pureness, this idea of what my identity had to be. Mm-hmm. And as I explored that more, I realized that like it could be all of these things, that I could pull all of these points of culture, all of these different bits of information that I had collected from all of these different places. And like that could be my identity, that could become me. And so the work, when I was thinking about materials, I was really thinking about my family, first of all. And like things like the tea, there's some of in the patchwork bags, they're stained with tea and with curry powder. And so it's like I use my mother's favorite brand of tea, which is like, I think it's Red Rose, and it's like a very English tea. And then I used her curry powder to do the staining for the other pieces. And so there's like obviously a very large British influence in my parents are specifically from Guyana. And it's considered to be a part of the Caribbean, even though it's South American, because of the British roots that they have. So yeah, there's this very big British influence in my life. Like I think about like my mom loving British soap operas as I was growing up. She would wake up early to watch them every Sunday. And so like all of these little bits that I can hold on to of like the culture that my mother has shown me were like also like the culture that she knows because that was what was brought to her. So they just made up the materials that I ended up using, and sugar is such a big part of the Caribbean. And it just felt like it was like a material that I had to absolutely work with. Like if I'm going to make this materially rich piece about, my culture being Caribbean, I had to absolutely use sugar. And so that's why it played such a big role.
Yeah. And that was one of my questions is like using melting sugar as a material language is so interesting. But I guess more like specifically, I wanted to ask what kind of effective experience does sugar, like melting sugar, offer? Like this, like there's something very affective about it. Like yeah. I don't know how else to explain it. It's so hard to put into words. Like when you go and look at it, you're like, oh my God, this is wild and amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I'm just fascinated with sugar in this current moment. I've like used it in a couple of my other pieces that I've made since this one. And every time I use it, I just like learn more about sugar, and it's just I'm obsessed. But yeah, there's like I think there's something about I don't know. I just like, I also want to describe myself as like sugar. Like, I feel like I have the characteristics of sugar. Like, it's like very like sickly sweet and like sticky. And, like it's a mess to clean up, but it's like, when it's boiling, when it's melted, it's volatile and it's dangerous. And, I think like all of those aspects really like add to the work. Like, I think that they are there and they're present. And I like the way that my work looks like it is in motion, even though it kind of is no longer. Like you really see that the sugar was melted and it was poured, you see that effect of the pouring of the sugar. And I think it's also like I guess like the meaning of the sugar, if we're really like getting down to it, was, this kind of hard to capture thing, this thing that you can't really hold. It's too hot to hold. It flows quickly and it melts through most things that it touches. But it slows, it cools and it slows, and it changes its form, and it goes from being a liquid to a solid. And the idea that I can pour it into these bags that are bodily and that have holes, and that the sugar can flow through them, they can flow through the fibers of the bags, but the sugar can also cool and block those holes in those bags. And so this idea of like sugar as like the lifeblood of the Caribbean, and this thing that you can't hold, but also this thing that is healing, was, I think, where I was going with that. Yeah.
Wow. I've never heard like someone describe sugar in this way before, but it kind of makes sense. And I love that you say you want to describe yourself as sugar. That's amazing.
It might be, yeah, maybe people who know me would not say that, but I think like I have been working with sugar for so long that I don't think that appeal would be there if I didn't feel the attraction and like the commonalities to the material as like myself.
So you've installed this work in the exhibition. It's in one of the vitrines. And I wanted to know more about this ritual of melting sugar and installing it. Like, I guess I want to know, what was that experience like in this specific space? How were you able to like sort of imagine and then execute the idea of how you wanted to look like in that space? And I imagine it's probably not too far off from like how you initially imagined it. And I also want to know, how does the ritual of melting sugar, I don't know, like significant, how is it significant to the kinds of lineages, inheritances that you're thinking about? So that's kind of like a long question, but first I want to know, like, what was it like to like melt the sugar and put the shelves up and do the thing? And then I also want to know about like, as you're doing it, as you're like melting the sugar, because you were there with the hot plate, right? Melting the sugar.
Yeah.
Like, is there a ritual behind it? Is it like get you sort of in touch with those, like this idea of lineage and like thinking about your like ancestry,
Yeah. I feel like it would be great if I said that there was, but I don't know that there is. Yeah, I mean, okay, I can go to the first question. The work, this is the third time that I've installed this work. And so I kind of like have a plan when I'm installing, and it is to like get everything up on the wall. And then, the sugar pouring, the melted sugar is the last part of that. And I like to be very detail oriented and planned when I'm making work, because I think like, details are super important. So I like for everything to be like just right. I'm like a bit of a perfectionist in that way. And with this work, I can do that up until the sugar, up until the melted sugar gets poured. At that point, it does what it wants. And it's been like really fascinating for me to get to like the more I work with sugar and the more I install this work specifically, like I get to learn things about how the sugar performs. And I'm learning the material more, but it still does whatever it wants, in a certain sense. Like it sometimes will eat through the shelf. Specifically, this time I installed and there's just a big hole in one of the shelves because it just melted through. Yeah, so and it
cool.
Just it was. I was like, whoa. I was super fascinated by that. Yeah, it just left just a giant, little funnel of melted sugar.
And it looks sharp.
Yeah, it is. I have cut myself on sugar many times. It flakes off into little shards that are like like if you broke glass, you know? So yes, it is sharp and dangerous. But yeah, there is like I was saying earlier about sugar, it's kind of uncontrollable. Like I'm learning how to kind of harness it, but I still don't fully know. And most of the time, as I'm pouring that sugar, I'm thinking like, I really hope I don't burn myself. I burned myself the first time I installed this work, the first time I completed the work. And I would never want to burn myself with sugar ever again. It is very painful and very sticky. It's a nightmare. So yeah, that's kind of what's going through my head as I'm doing the hot sugar pour is like, I really please get all of my skin as far away from the sugar as possible. And so sometimes I'm not really designing a visual aesthetic as I'm doing the pour. I'm kind of like, I know that sugar needs to be poured here, here, and here. Yeah. And so I do it. And then I just like, let whatever the sugar wants to happen for the most part.
So what I'm understanding, I think, is like the sugar is really this symbolic of your heritage and a specific place where sugar is important, and it's very much about the material than it is about but why melting sugar? Why not just like sugar sprinkled, you know? Why does it need to melt?
I am kind of working with like all the kinds of sugar. Like in the bags, there's granulated white sugar. And there is one bag that's just filled with white sugar. And then I am burning the sugar to like various, like I guess I'm caramelizing it sometimes, but other times I am directly just burning it. And I think that it's like important to talk about this material in all of the ways that it can exist materially. And I like to hearken that to like the way that Guyana is as a country, like the way that it is so multifaceted culturally, and like the people are so different. And for the most part, kind of very divided because of these different cultures that exist in that place. But I think it's nice to have them all exist like within my work, especially when I'm doing this cultural exploration that I don't know, you know, what is important to me and where I am culturally, but to just like include this like wide view of like the people of Guyana through like the many different ways that sugar can look and can be.
So this one part of the work, sugar, so important. You see it, you can't stop looking at it. I've seen it. I couldn't stop looking at it. I kept going back to it. But then the other part of your work that is, I think, equally important, and it really almost contextualizes, is the poem. And I wanted to know, like, how did the poem come to be, and why was it important to have a poem part of the work?
Because I think like, and this is a thing that I'm, you know, still trying to navigate, and I am, you know, by no means have I like nailed this aspect of my work, but I think like what I'm talking about it specifically is how much you give your audience, you know, how much information you provide your audience, and like how much you just like let your work be appreciated. And I think for this work specifically, it was really important for me that that poem existed, because like, while I think that the work can stand alone and like is visually like very appealing, I want the viewer to know what it's about, because it's about this very specific experience that I like, you know, you can appreciate the way that the work looks. And I would love for everybody to appreciate the way that the work looks, but I really want people who look like me and people who have the same kind of cultural identity that I have to like know that like there are other people who are trying to navigate this idea of culture and this like loss of identity and you're not alone in that. And we're trying to figure it out all together. And that there's work, that there are other artists who are making work about that thing.
Yeah.
And you can find it. Yeah.
That's a really beautiful thing to say. And I know I keep saying the word beautiful, but that's the only way I could describe it, I feel, because there are times when, and this is just me projecting my own like museum studies background and like art historian like critique, when I walk into a show and I'm just like, what is this work? I don't know what this work is. I want to know more about it. And everyone who looks at it has like a different experience of it. And then I find out that it's about something that's so meaningful and deep, and I had no idea, but because I couldn't figure out the work, like it just wasn't direct enough. It just wasn't accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So if for me, when you're speaking about the poem, the word accessibility comes up as, as a result of having it with that installation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it became a huge part of my work, accessibility specifically, in the last couple of years, because I realized, and it was, I guess, also one of the reasons why I made this work and it exists the way that it does, was because I realized that a lot of the art that I was making, my parents wouldn't understand. They wouldn't get it at all. They would look at it and they wouldn't understand it. They would read a statement that I wrote about it and they wouldn't understand it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I want them to be able to understand it, because it means, they're also understanding me. And, my art should be accessible to as many people as possible. You shouldn't need any sort of education to look at the work that I'm making and relate to it or understand what's happening here. And so that was a huge part of the poem and for my family as well. Yeah.
So going forward with your practice now in the future, you've mentioned a couple times that you're working with sugar. What kinds of things do you want to do with the sugar? And I guess, do you have plans to like create this accessibility in it, or like do you have like a bigger audience or different kind of audience that you want to like target? I guess I just want to know, like, what's next for you, Kassandra?
I think the more I work with sugar, the more I learn about it, the more fascinated I am by it as a material. And maybe one day, like, this fascination will like naturally come to a close. I don't know if the next work I make will include sugar, but if there is a possibility for me to, then it probably will. I want to continue to make work that is expressive of my identity, that is, I don't know, as I am starting to navigate the art world, I'm not seeing many people who look like me or who are making work like me. And I want that, like, I want that for myself, like, very selfishly. Like, I want to be inspired by people making similar work to me who look like me. I want that. But then I want that for other people. I want that for people who maybe just started their degree and look like me and want to make work like me and feel like there isn't a place for that. Because for some reason, sometimes the art world makes you feel like you can't talk about your feelings, even though we're all artists and like super sensitive. But yet we can't talk about our feelings because somehow it demeans the work. But yeah, I think it's important. I think especially in this day and age that we're living in, like, you need to feel comfortable expressing your emotions and your feelings. You need to feel comfortable talking about these hard things like racial tensions and colonial histories. Like, these are things that if we don't talk about them, then nobody learns about them. And if nobody learns about them, I don't know if I want to live in a world where nobody's learning about these things.